I wish somebody told me that emotional energy is a valuable resource. As a deep feeler, I have often felt like I'm too much or too dramatic or too sensitive in any given situation. If I had known that emotional energy is a valuable resource, I would have had more feelings of self worth. But growing up as a deep feeler, I don't think that that's really the case. When you're told that you're too dramatic or too much or too sensitive, what actually ends up happening is the reverse. You end up internalizing all of these things and feeling like in these environments, in these dynamics, in these relationships, that your emotions are the problem. Yet, when you're with your friends, or for example, when I'm at work, it's a very valuable resource. People feel seen, people feel heard, people feel validated, people feel as though they can be their authentic selves. And so, deep feeling in these scenarios have taught me that it is a valuable resource. If your emotions are a valuable resource, that means where you invest your emotional energy, it's just that, it's an investment. And I don't really like to speak about energy or emotional energy this way, like it's transactional, but where you invest your energy, right? You're building something. So whether that's a connection, that's a relationship, and you're building trust. When that is undermined, so whether that means your feelings are invalidated, deflected, glossed over, dismissed, bulldozed, erased completely, there is no reciprocity. So that means you're putting your emotional energy into a situation, and then what you get in return is basically the opposite of an investment. It is depreciation. But instead, what I would have done in my past relationships, in my past dynamics with my family members and otherwise, was I called it going back to get kicked like a dog. So in that time, I was just over giving. I was over giving, and I don't know if any of you can relate to this, but I think a lot of deep feelers can. You overgive until you're burning out. And the reason that I overgave was because I didn't know that this was worth something. I didn't know that the very thing I got dismissed for was the very thing that people actually come to me for. In my relationships, I now know you don't get to seek me out for this and then demonize me for this. That is not okay. That's actually manipulation. It's also very emotionally controlling. That is not healthy terms. That's not a healthy relationship to have with emotions or in a dynamic. And also, if your emotions are not being respected, you must withdraw your energy. And that leads me to my second point. When you know that your emotional energy is an investment, when it's not being respected, heard, listened to, or appreciated, you withdraw. And not in a way that's punishing, but in a way that's, all right, I respect myself enough that my energy here isn't being met, not being met in a way that meets my needs, meaning, and not in a controlling way, not in a demanding way, but in a way of self respect. I, in my sovereign being, recognize in this moment that my emotions are not being met with care. And here's how that lands in my body. Here's how that feels. If it doesn't feel good, you must step away and decide for yourself. Go and regulate and figure out, is this dynamic or this relationship worthy of my emotional investment, of my emotional energy? I literally spent years chasing people who avoid feeling, chasing people who demonize feelings, who looked at feelings as a problem or something to solve. That actually wasn't a reflection of my worthiness. That is a reflection of their own relationship with feelings. I was not aware of that. So this whole time, I was running around thinking to myself, oh, I must be the problem. Maybe if I say it in a way that is more gentle. Maybe if I say it in a way where my tone is more controlled. Maybe if I say it in a way where I am just kinder, more compassionate, more respectful. But it turns out, whether you say it spicy, whether you yell, whether you deliver it in a way that is just like you've been talking to somebody like a baby. Sometimes you're just not met with willingness to engage. And when you're not met with the other party's willingness, because again, this is an energy exchange, you withdraw your energy. Because at that point, it doesn't actually matter how you say it. You won't be heard because that person was never willing to engage. So when your emotions meet somebody's wall, when your emotions meet somebody's denial, deflection, you don't chase. That was my immediate instinct. I would chase. I would say, I really value this relationship. I really want to seek repair. And I would chase, and then I would be flooding their nervous system. And they would be repelled by me. And I was like, what's happening? I only have the intention of love. I see now that that was me not knowing the value of what I bring to the table. Okay. And that this goes both ways. So when somebody comes to me and they tell me how they feel, I'm actively listening. You actively listen. Okay. It sounds like this situation or this behavior or your current circumstances are landing in your body this way. You repeat to them what they said, and then you ask, am I understanding this correctly? And then you give the other person the chance to speak. If that is not the baseline for your dynamic, whatever it is, then you're putting yourself in a position where you have to prove why this person should give you empathy. And that's when the bar gets really, really, really low. You do not beg people for empathy, okay? We do not beg people for empathy. We do not need to convince people of the impact of their behavior on how you feel. The minute that the baseline of empathy from the other party isn't being met in this exchange, it is actually less of a reflection of them, okay? That might be their capacity, their limit, or their defense. They they're actually incapable of. So then this is where you regain your power. Because in this dynamic, you're choosing to participate in it. And if you're choosing to participate in a dynamic where empathy isn't offered to you, that's your choice. Don't do that. I spent so many years participating in these relationships in my family, in my past relationships, in toxic work environment dynamics, and I had no clue. Yet, if somebody had told me that emotional energy is a resource, I'd be able to say, oh, I have to treat this with care. I have to protect this. This is my nervous system. This is a valuable thing. This is something that I offer to other people that allows them space to feel authentically themselves, to make them to create emotional safety, to allow room for depth. We move beyond the surface and we go into deeper meaning, into nuance. That's really, really valuable because the truth is, some people only live on the surface. And as deep feelers, the surface is like the trees. And the deep feeling is like the mycelium, the root system that's underneath, okay? That's you. That's valuable because without that, there's no tree. That's my only point that I had to make is emotional energy is a valuable resource. I wish that I knew that. And for anybody who doesn't know that, your emotional energy is really valuable. You're not too much. You're not too sensitive. You're not too dramatic. But maybe what you are is overgiving or burning yourself out in dynamics where it's not being reciprocated or it's not being respected or it's being completely dismissed or trampled on or violated. Ask yourself, is this dynamic worthy of my emotional investment? Is this relationship meeting my emotional needs? And does it feel emotionally safe? And if you can answer yes, and you feel like it's being met here, amazing. That's beautiful. That is how you protect and safeguard your emotional energy. And if it's not, you withdraw, not to punish, but to protect yourself, because you're worthy of that, because you should not be abandoning yourself for somebody else's comfort. If you found any of this relatable, please write down in the comments the times that you've been told that you were too much, too dramatic, or too sensitive. Were you? Or was their container too small? Or were they being dismissive? Or were they being invalidating? And now that you have the language to know that this is a valuable resource, how will you be able to navigate your relationships moving forward? And that's all I have to say. Bye.